everybody, welcome back to the Jane Eyre vlog series. As always, I'm your co-host, Sarah Hurley.
And I'm your co-host, Nadea.
And this week we are wrapping up the novel Jane Eyre. We've just got a few chapters left, and Nadea is back with us this week, so I think she's going to jump right into a summary of the last chapters of the novel. Very exciting things happen.
We pick up from chapter 34, when Jane has just, or at the end of chapter 33, she's just received her big inheritance from her uncle who passed away. And from him, she received £20,000, which is a lot of money. And Jane decides that she wants to be generous and giving with this large sum that she's just received. And she decides to split the sum with the rest of the new family she's discovered that she has. So she wants to give £5,000 to Diana, 5,000 to Mary, and 5,000 to St. John as well. And there was a bit of resistance against her wishes at first, but eventually she's so firm in her decision, as she is in most of her decisions, and she resolves to share this money with the rest of her new family that she's found, which I love because it just, I don't know, just it made so much sense. I felt for Jane's character to be so generous and giving with this money. And I thought it was especially honorable after she came to them literally begging with no money, no nothing, just the clothes on her back. And so from there, she receives her inheritance. She shares with her family, and then we get a bit more from the family. St. John, as we know, has a bit of a crush on Rosamond, correct?
That's what I've been saying, Rosamond.
Okay, perfect. He's a bit of a crush on Rosamond, but he surprises Jane and surprised me by announcing that he's going to India for as a missionary. He's going, and he invites Jane to go with him as his wife, which wow, that was very surprising to me. I did not see that coming, because I was hung up on this him and Rosamond, will they, won't they type thing. So I was looking for more of that. I did not expect him to basically propose to Jane in a very non-passionate way. So Jane, of course, refuses this proposal. She offers to accompany him to India as a sister, but he says basically that given their ages, the circumstances around that would be very, very odd. And so basically she either has to go as his wife and get married to him, her cousin, or just not go at all. So Jane is very resistant to this offer. She says, no, I will not marry you. I will not be your wife and go to India with you. I'll go as your sister, but that's all. But St. John would basically rather her not go at all at that point. So he turns very cold towards her. And he keeps asking over and over, Jane, please come with me, please be my wife, come to India with me, because he sees kind of in her spirit this very like holy, very Christian-like morality, and he thinks that Jane is kind of the perfect person to accompany him to India, which is why he's so persistent in his requests. But Jane is as firm as she always is, and she resists his numerous proposals, and eventually she seems a bit iffy about it. So St. John asks for kind of a final answer, and Jane says basically, I'm waiting for a sign from God to know if I should go to India or if I should not, basically. And when she says this, she hears Mr. Rochester's voice just out of nowhere, kind of coming with the wind. And she calls back out to him, but he's not there. She's still at the Rivers house. So that's but for Jane, that's her sign that she should not go to India, that she should go find Mr. Rochester. So yeah, so she packs up a little bit. She says, I'll be gone for 4 days. And she returns to Thornfield to find Mr. Rochester. Thornfield is gone because it was burnt in a fire, which is, oh my gosh, so many big twists in these last last several chapters, but Jane learns upon returning to Thornfield and doing a bit of investigating that Thornfield burnt down because of the crazy mad wife who was kept in the attic. She escaped her attic prison again and set the house on fire. So that caused the Thornfield fire. Mr. Rochester, in an act of heroism, made sure to get all the servants out of the house, um, and so he was busy kind of downstairs doing that. While he was rescuing or attempting to rescue everybody, at least, Bertha Rochester, his quote unquote mad wife, went up to the roof and prepared to swan dive, to put it gently. Yeah, so Bertha Rochester she's on the roof, she's preparing to swan dive. She does, and the novel kind of describes the scene is in a very gruesome way. I think she splatters on the pavement and there's blood and it's a whole gruesome scene. And Mr. Rochester is unable to save her. But because he was in the house as he's making his way, or as he was making his way, out of Thornfield Mansion, the house, because it is on fire, kind of crumbled down around him, and he was hit by like a falling beam, and there's all this soot, etc. So Mr. Rochester, as Jane learns when she inquires about what happened at Thornfield, because she obviously wasn't present to witness this, but she learns that Mr. Rochester lost his sight in this fire, and he was also injured. His hand had to be amputated. So he's in a very different state than when we last left him. But this news just makes Jane even more sympathetic towards him, I think. And so she seeks him out. He's living in a smaller kind of situation of smaller means, or the appearance of smaller means at least. And Jane arrives at the new lodgings where Mr. Rochester is staying and being taken care of. And she does a fun little thing. I thought it was fun. It reminded me of his gypsy ruse earlier in the novel. She surprises him by carrying in a tray of tea that he requests. And when he hears her voice, he recognizes her obviously, but he doesn't believe that it's her because he can't see. So he's very, kind of and he's in disbelief, and Jane has to kind of convince him that she's real and she's here. Yeah, and so Jane has to kind of convince him that she's real and she's here, because he's just in disbelief since he can't see her at all. And so they have kind of a reconciliation moment, a reuniting. They go on a little walk and they have a little talk, kind of. Jane is guiding Mr. Rochester the whole way. And I found this moment very romantic. I know we're on a bit of a Mr. Rochester hate train, but I thought this was very sweet. Just the way they were caring for each other, kind of, in this moment. I guess he was doing less of the caring, but I think seeing him in this more vulnerable state and seeing Jane so not dismissive of, but unaffected, I guess, by his blindness, or his like crippledness, as they call it in the novel, his amputated hand. None of that stops her from loving him, which I really appreciated. And she was so outward about this. There was also there was a funny line that I had underlined, because as she's talking to Mr. Rochester, she's telling him about where she's been all this time since she left Thornfield. So she's discussing her new family and her new inheritance. And of course she mentions St. John, and discusses the proposals, that kind of thing. And so Mr. Rochester has a moment of jealousy, and Jane kind of teases him about this and toys with him a bit, because she talks about St. John and describes him as handsome, because he's described as handsome. And so Mr. Rochester gets a bit jealous, and he's like, well, he's saying to Jane, why don't you go marry St. John then? Why are you here with me? Um, why are you here with me, basically? Um, and then she's just so firm, and I care about you. I want to be here with you. But the funny line that I thought was really silly. We talked a lot earlier about how consistently she likes to detail Mr. Rochester's ugliness. And so I thought it was really funny that when he asks, "Am I hideous, Jane?" she replies, "Yes, sir. You always were, you know." I think that made me laugh out loud a bit. Really funny, but I appreciate her honesty. I think it shows just how much she really cares. She says, "Yes, you're hideous, and you always have been." But we also get this really delicate moment where she's kind of telling him, she's like, "Yeah, you're kind of ugly right now, but like if you give me a comb, I can clean your hair, and I can take care of your appearance a bit, basically, since he can't see himself." But I thought that was very sweet. Yeah, so Jane and Mr. Rochester, they're having their nice moment. They're reunited. They're having these very tender, very gentle moments that I thought expressed their kind of love and caring for each other. And it really, I don't know, it was so tender to me compared to how kind of harsh, I guess, we are a bit earlier in the novel, I feel. Um, it seems like just, I don't know, his Mr. Rochester's blindness, and Jane is so gentle with him, um, and so reassuring that she still cares about him even though he's as ugly as he's always been. um, I found these moments to be the most romantic in the whole novel. It reminded me a bit of kind of Austinian, just the very tender physical intimacy that we're getting here. So I really, really liked I really, really liked these last several chapters for this. And while Mr. Rochester and Jane are having their warm and tender and gentle conversations, um, Mr. Rochester proposes to Jane. She says, "Choose then, sir, her who loves you best." And he says, "I will at least choose her I love best. Jane, will you marry me?" And I thought that was a really sweet proposal. And I don't know, I like Mr. Rochester again now.
Yeah,
What can I say?
I
He's won me over.
I'll give him. He has some really sweet, cute moments. In the end, I still don't like him. I think I'm just a man hater. Truly, I'm also no longer Team Sinjin. I know last week I was like, "Oh wait, he's so repressed. That's kind of hot." Like, I know last week I was singing his praises, but then I clearly had forgotten how much he tries to pressure Jane into marrying him for like 3 consecutive chapters.
Yeah.
And I found that to be really off-putting when I was rereading
Uh-huh.
it. So I'm no longer Team Sinjin at all. I'm also, however, not Team Rochester. I just don't like him. I think he's a
You're
little.
Team Jane.
I'm Team Jane. Yeah, I think Mr. Rochester is also too old for her, and that's creepy. Like, you are a 40-year-old man crushing on a 19-year-old girl. Like, that's. I know that it was more common in hundreds. I simply don't like it. I simply
Mm-hmm.
don't enjoy it. There's no reason for you to be attracted to a near minor, a child. Even if she is mature, even if the way Jane puts it when she's telling him, "Oh, like I still love you. I will consent to be your wife now." The way she puts it is that his new deformities, his new disabilities have put them on equal ground because now she can care for him. She has something to give to him. So that makes a union between them okay. They're more equals now. Also because she has a bit of money of her own, even though it's not the full £20,000, it's just 5,000. I simply don't agree. I simply don't think that that's enough to put them on equal footing. There's always going to be a power imbalance in the relationship. And I don't like that. I don't know. Call me a radical 21st century feminist, but I don't love it. I feel like Austinian pairings are created to allow the man and woman much more equality in the relationship. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a man hater. That could also be true. Maybe I'm just a misandrist.
No, I definitely agree with the age gap thing though. It's definitely something that's very, very present.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But I will
in
give you
in
that.
novels
There's
from the era.
sweet moments if you like forget who Mr. Rochester is. If he's a little weirdo and just listening to the words that are coming out of his mouth, it's really cute. It's really
I did. I thought it was sweet. And then the way too that they kind of very, very quickly eloped, um, which it did remind me a bit of kind of the first time they were supposed to get married, which was also supposed to be very rushed. So that that was a little bit not the most ideal comparison, but the speed here felt like it was for a different reason. So I appreciated that too. I love a good eloping. Yeah,
and
very.
in these final few chapters, we get something really gothic. We get the true first supernatural element in the novel. Because for all of our talk of ghosts and specters and what's that thing going bump in the night in this house in Thornfield, it turns out to be Bertha Rochester, who's making these strange noises at night, who's wailing, who is shredding Jane's wedding veil. She's behind it all. And she's not supernatural. She's just a woman who's been driven mad for one reason or another, who's been locked up in the attic by her husband, who everybody has forgotten about. And so she's not a supernatural element, which that's common in Gothic literature to sort of allude to this supernatural presence around hanging out that turns out to be something that can be explained by natural forces. But we do have a real supernatural element that's introduced in one of the last chapters. She's talking about when they're talking, saying, "Oh, I still love you. I feel called to you. Like even when we were apart, I dreamt of you." Um, Jane is saying, I prayed for you. And Mr. Rochester is saying, "I began to see and acknowledge the hand of God in my doom. I began to experience remorse, repentance, the wish for reconcilement to my maker. I began sometimes to pray. Very brief prayers they were, but very sincere." And then he talks about how he's talking to God and begging to be reunited with Jane and praying. And he calls out, "Jane, Jane, Jane," which is what Jane heard when she was praying and heard his voice from across the moors. And she says, "Did you speak these words aloud?" And ask if it was last Monday night, somewhere near midnight. And he says, "Yes, but time is of no consequence." A voice was replied, "I'm coming, wait for me." And a moment after went whispering on the wind the words, "Where are you?" And he's just talking about this, and she's like, "Dude, you will never guess what happened. Oh my gosh, I literally heard you. I literally came to find you because I heard you. I heard you from across the country." That's crazy. So we do have this one truly supernatural event that has occurred within the novel. And they could be having a joint hallucination. That's actually equally probable. They're both little freaks. They're little weirdos. It would not surprise me. But as long as we're willing to put some belief into it, we have our one real supernatural element of the novel, which is a really fun twist stylistically on Charlotte Brontës' part, I thought. Then we come to the infamous chapter 38, which begins with the extremely iconic line, "Reader, I married him." And we see this use of reader throughout this novel, but also in so many novels after Jane Eyre as a sort of a callback to this. I think even Taylor Swift on Midnights released a song called Dear Reader that was a callback to Jane Eyre because of how she says, dear reader," all throughout the novel as Jane is speaking to the audience. "Reader, I married him," and we talk about this quick wedding and everything. And then we get to the part where she's explaining when and where and why and how she's telling this story. She says, "I have now been married 10 years. So she's telling this story, this whole novel, this whole time she's been telling this story. It's 10 years after her marriage to Mr. Rochester. I know what it is to live entirely for and with what I love best on earth. I hold myself supremely blessed, blessed beyond what language can express, because I am my husband's life as fully as he is mine. No woman was ever nearer to her mate than I am, ever more absolutely bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh, which is a really iconic line, even though I'm not, I'm not a Rochester. And then we get a sort of epilogue talking about how Diana and Mary Rivers are both married and they visit frequently. And St. John went to India and never married. And now he has indeed fallen ill because of the elements, the harsh climate in India, and he's on death's door. But he's ready. He's written to her saying, surely I come quickly, speaking to the Lord, and hourly I more eagerly respond, amen, even so come, Lord Jesus. So we get everything tied up nicely in a cute little bow, and I guess we're led to believe that Jane lives out the rest of her life after these 10 years with Mr. Rochester until he passes. And that's the end of the story.
I thought it was a really interesting ending. The way this last note that we get is kind of about St. John's like impending death. I thought it was really very an interesting way for us to close this one. Not the happy wedding between Jane and the man she's kind of loved for most of the novel, but instead the impending death of St. John. It was strange to me. I don't know what you think about that, but
It is kind of strange, I think, but I don't think it's that uncommon of a way to end a novel in that time period. I think even with Pride and Prejudice, the novel ends not with they lived happily ever after in marital bliss forever and ever. It ends by talking about the Gardiners and saying how much Darcy and Elizabeth appreciated them and were thankful to them for the rest of their lives because the Gardiners were the ones who ended up putting them together. And it ends similarly with a recap of everybody's lives, Jane with Mr. Bingley and Lydia with Wickham and the parents, of course. So I wasn't surprised by it. I thought, it is an interesting choice to end with St. John, but, we do get this very heavily religious message in the end where Jane is saying, yes, Lord, come, take me when you're ready. I'm ready to die. I've lived a life. And I think that that's something that ties St. John and Jane together. They've both lived a life that they think is really full and that they're very fulfilled with. So I think maybe that is the reason that's where we end.
I agree with that. I think I don't think the ending is. I don't think it's depressing just because it mentions death. I think it's. I mean, St. John doesn't even sound that kind of upset about it. I guess
No,
he's welcoming. He's embracing.
Take me home.
Yeah. So I think it is definitely triumphant in that like religious kind of Christian way.
All right. Do we have any final thoughts, or would we like to save them for next week's episode whenever we talk about adaptations and maybe Charlotte Bronte's other works and how it all comes together to make the iconic story that we now know as Jane Eyre?
I definitely don't want to say too much now. I want to save most of my words for next week's special episode. Um, but I want to say that I enjoyed reading this novel because I did enjoy reading this novel. I haven't obviously this is kind of the big thing of our series, but I haven't read this before. I haven't read any Charlotte Bronte before. I've read Wuthering Heights, but that's the only kind of experience I've had with the Bronte sisters and their ultimate works. Um, but it was a really, really fun read. I really love Jane Eyre as a heroine, just how firm she is in her morals and how passionate she is, and how kind of unyielding, unrelenting. Like when she's firm in a belief or an opinion or something she wants or does not want, she does not just change, despite how much pressure she might feel from the other people in her life, especially the other men in her life. Um, and so I really enjoyed spending all this time with Jane Eyre and getting to read it alongside you, Sarah, my lovely co-host. Um, yeah, I'm excited for our final episode, excited for some adaptations. Um, but I think I'll save most of my words for next week.
And next week, if you would like to continue reading along, I think in depth we are going to be discussing the 1946 Orson Welles radio play adaptation of Jane Eyre, as well as the widely beloved 2006 miniseries, which is up for free on Pluto TV, and the latest film adaptation that came out in 2011. And then we'll also maybe sprinkle in mentions of a couple more. But if you would like to have a greater understanding of the things that we talk about, you are welcome to watch along with us. In fact, we would love that. Please do.
Please do. This will be my first time experiencing all of these things as well. So I'm very excited to view and enjoy these adaptations, and I hope you'll join us along. Yeah, join us for our adaptation journey. Before we sign off, we would like to ask that you please consider donating to Jane Austen & Co. and Jane Austen Summer Program. Sarah and I are doing these vlogs as a volunteer project, which has been so much fun so far. But that basically means that we need the funding to cover kind of support for our technology, and et cetera, et cetera. So we really appreciate donations. I'll put a link in the description below, and Sarah will put one in the blog post as well if you're viewing this there. But you can donate to us at janeaustensummer.org/donate.
All right. Thank you so much for this week. I've been Sarah Hurley.
And I've been Nadea Pugh.
And we'll see you next time on the Jane Eyre vlog series. Bye-bye.